Hello, I'm here with Elizabeth Gardiner. She is just about to retire from her time as a government lawyer, and she has been the head of the drafting part of government. Really important part because, as you all know, government makes legislation all the time. So, Elizabeth, do you want to tell us what you've been doing, I think, for 32 years now, and as the boss for the last 8 years?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I joined the Parliamentary Counsel office in 1991. Feels like forever ago now. And I've been first Parliamentary Counsel head of the office since 2015. So we had quite a busy time in all of those 30 odd years.
But quite a busy time since 2015 Absolutely. In particular. So Brexit, COVID, all sorts of challenges come to mind, particularly from a drafting point of view, because we've had to make a lot of legislation very quickly.
Yes. A huge challenge. I think if anybody had told me that was what was going to be on my plate when I took the job, I would probably have run a mile. But that would have been a mistake because it's been an amazing experience. Brexit, a huge legislative challenge across government, but nowhere more so than probably in the Parliamentary Counsel office. So all of those pieces of legislation that had to be produced, but all the thinking that went on behind with our colleagues in the Government Legal Department to really think about how you keep the statute book on its feet where you leave the EU, when so much of our law derived from the EU. So that was a massive challenge. And then the fact that the dates were never very certain and that we had to be ready for every eventuality. So it is the only time I think I have put a bill through between Christmas and New Year through Parliament. And it went through very speedily indeed. And as I say to people, they say, can we put our bill through the emergency procedure? And I always say to them, there is no emergency procedure. There's just the normal procedure done very fast. So there've been quite a few bills put through very late.
And of course, COVID, we made an extraordinary amount of law very quickly to deal with what was a completely unprecedented situation.
So the COVID bill itself, which was done very early on in the pandemic, was done in our office. Of course, it's our colleagues in the Government Legal Department who took the bulk of the drafting work on all the regulations that had to be produced endlessly overnight. But even in the bill, I think we had, well over half of the office working on that one piece of legislation. Basically, everything else stopped, and that was the focus. And that was pulled together at extraordinary speed, and then huge amount was even went through the House very quickly. But even so, that weekend that it was in the House, we added lots more material. So that was really challenging. But I always look back on that experience. One of the things about being first Parliamentary Counsel, and we've talked before about the fact that the office is full of experts because we bring people in and train them and keep them. And I used to go to those meetings, and never did I think, how are we going to do this? I would always think, I have people who are very capable of doing this.
Who will do it.
And who are very willing. And, that was... it was a very difficult time for me personally, and they were having to work very hard to produce the legislation as well, all worried about their families and everything. But they were very much looking after each other as well. And so the bill was produced, and people were saying, what can I do to help? Is there anything more that needs drafted? Yeah, check anything for you. And so in that way, it felt like we were all
quite a positive experience. I know, I suspect as we focus on some of the things that we didn't get so right in government during COVID, we've almost banked the things that government did do really well at that dreadful time. And I know from being a minister at that time, making some really quite novel decisions to make sure that people got food on the shelves every day. How well some of that regulation worked.
Yeah, and it was extraordinary, and some of the things that we're having to legislate for were things that we would never have imagined having to legislate for. And I don't often put pen to paper these days, but even I had to be called into.
Yes, exactly. I think it was all hands on deck. That's certainly how it felt from our department. And we were doing things like getting rid of rules about the hours drivers could drive to deliver food, which normally, of course, we wouldn't want to do. We'd have safety concerns, but getting food delivered, which was my job, was more important.
Yes, and still trying to maintain that balance.
The balance all the time. It's really difficult, but I did feel we worked as government, in the main, well, to try to do that.
It was an extraordinarily busy time. I remember that weekend when the House the Wilson House actually thought my computer had malfunctioned because it was just pinging. It was usually too hot, but that was just emails coming in.
Yeah.
That rate was just incredible. And that was people with new ideas of new things that they thought we might need the powers to do, and trying to make sure that they were stress tested at a point, so that we could take them to Parliament. So looking back on it, it was extraordinary what was achieved, and that was very much a team effort, not just in our office, but right across government.
I agree. So that's certainly not the pre-COVID impression I had, if you like, of the Office of Parliamentary Counsel. I think in the past we obviously look up to you as very learned and very knowledgeable about the way that you draft, and very much keepers of the way that we do write legislation in this country. What would the normal procedure be for normal legislation, or is that all gone now?
So, yes, I don't know if there is a norm, really. It's
there used to be.
It used to be slower.
Yes.
But I think the world...
We used to write to you with instructions.
Well, still right, thankfully.
Good.
We're still right, usually. So I think the world was slower. When I joined the office 30 years ago, we hadn't long introduced computers into the office. There was one terminal in the basement which linked to the internet, which, we went down and dusted off occasionally.
We didn't have that initially when I joined. So I joined in 1997.
Yeah.
And certainly the thought of sending an external email was quite a radical one.
Yeah. No email, but we could go and look on Lexis or whatever it was called.
Yeah, we could do that in the library.
Yes, exactly. And so, you put letters in the out tray and they were collected and delivered, and everything was just slower. And so the pace of life has just got faster and faster. And in a way that's, for us, for COVID, it was just an extreme version of what had been happening for many years. And so somebody asked me afterwards if I wanted to write something reflecting on what was done differently during COVID. And I did reflect, but I really felt that it wasn't so much there was any real step change. It's just that we did what we always did, but we did it a bit faster, because that has been the direction of travel.
So can I unpick a bit what you always do?
Yes.
So we, government and government lawyers, give you instructions. We tell you what we want to achieve. How do you go about making that a piece of legislation that fits with the rest of the legislation we have?
So I think traditionally we would have sat back and waited for those written instructions to come. Now, increasingly, we will be in touch with the department much earlier on, either talking about what they're planning to do, how they're planning to do it, seeing if we can add anything at that stage from our experience in producing legislation and getting it through Parliament, and just thinking about how approaches that are likely to work and approaches that are not likely to work.
Yes. I mean, I know that from my role now. We've talked at a much earlier stage than I would have anticipated, and having conversations with you about how we could frame that properly and in a way that fits with other legislation has been really useful.
And I think I always say to people that I think the job is 80% thinking and 20% writing.
Yeah.
I think people envisage it as being the other way around, and that it's all about words on the page. And if you're struggling as a drafter to get the words on the page, it's because you haven't done enough thinking.
Yes.
And so much of the preparation, like decorating, it's all of the preparation, all the thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve, what would be the most efficient and effective way to achieve it, how it fits in with the existing legislative landscape, with the existing common law, and how it will look, because that's very important, and it's always been very important. I think there's a sort of view that's only now do we care about these things. But
oh no, we've always had our style.
Yes, and 150 years ago, they were saying, there's no point in producing a bill that won't be passed by Parliament, and it's exactly the same now. So, we're looking at all of those things. We're working closely with the department, but we do still, in most cases, have written instructions, and I think that's a very valuable exercise, because when somebody has to express what they think on paper,
and what they want,
they realise they don't really know. And so that is quite a helpful.
Yet certainly, I mean, having been on the other side, trying to produce those instructions is a moment of deep thought at the department, usually, because you have to crystallise what it is that you're trying to achieve.
And then the drafter will look at the instructions. They will not generally send you fully worked up draft on day one. They might not send you a draft for some time, but there might be meetings and phone calls and letters going back and forth asking further questions, trying to tease out exactly what's wanted.
And you become really quite close, don't you, to your colleagues, to your clients.
And the bills that are fun are sometimes not the bills people expect, but the bills where you've had fantastic clients who are at the top of their game. I did an energy bill in about 2008, I think, where the clients were just amazing. And we did quite innovative things, but it was just really interesting because they really understood their policy area.
So, I mean, I think it's fair to say that possibly you have a academic image and a slightly fusty image, if I dare say that, among certainly the government legal community. But that's not necessarily right, is it? You've been early embracers of AI. You're very keen to use whatever technology can do to help, aren't you?
Yes, and I think that is true. I think, we did traditionally, sit in our own building kind of aloof from people, but that probably hasn't been true for certainly more than 20 years. Yeah. We're in a shared building now, but I think it's one of those bits, I think Whitehall quite enjoys its myths sometimes. But we also think we're a bit sort of Wizard of Oz-y. We're actually just an ordinary person sitting behind the curtain, and when people meet you, they say, "Oh, actually, you're not as eccentric as we thought you were."
And technology can be quite useful, can't it, in doing your job?
Well, throughout my time, we've had computers on our desks, and the drafters are expected to do everything. So they're drafting their bills, they're amending their bills, they're tabling their bills, they're tabling their amendments. And we recently moved to a new online platform, which I shared with the government legal department. Yeah,
which is great. I mean, the precedents are so good that even I could almost draft an essay.
Yeah, so the sort of scheme that's set out there to enable you to, complete your bill is really good. And the fact that it's all joined up with the House now and the publishers makes it all seamless. So it's been a long time in coming, and the Parliamentary Council have been very heavily involved in developing it because it's been developed for us. Along with the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish drafters. And so, I think we're not sitting there with velvet quills as people might think, and very much embrace the technology. But that is one of the things that's allowed it to be faster. When I joined the office, one of the reasons it was slower is because people didn't amend their bills like that right up to introduction. They weren't constantly amending them. Before I joined, they used to send bills to the printers, and that completely slowed the process down, obviously. So yes, that ability to amend and be constantly revising your work, which appeals to the perfectionist of the Parliamentary Council, who's forever trying to improve their work, but also means that you can do things faster and faster.
So should people join?
Of course they should join. In fact, we're just recruiting at the moment. We've just had the interviews, and we had a very, very strong field, and it was very heartening to see that many people from within the government legal profession, but also from the private sector, are very interested in joining. And my colleagues have done a lot in recent years to try and promote the office. As you say, even within government, we weren't that well known.
No, you were always a bit academic and a bit other.
Yes, so we've done lots of things, including workshops. We've got a little video online about what it's like to be a parliamentary counsel, try and break down those assumptions, because it is an absolute, if you're a lawyer, it is absolutely fascinating.
And what's, as I've taken legislation through and become more involved in actually producing bills, I've learned what an absolutely integral part of those teams you are.
Yeah, it's a fascinating job. And you go home at night, you switch on the 10 o'clock news, and more than half of the things that they're talking about in the news are very intimately connected with legislation. And so you're right at the heart of what's happening in politics, what's happening in government, and yet it is an academic job, and that's one of the things that attracts people to it.
It's sort of all the good things about the government legal service, but especially so if you really like words and drafting,
and if you like the law, as in you don't want to be too specialised in one area.
And that's true.
You are looking at different areas of law all the time, and that's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, I think so. So what are you going to do now?
So sitting in the House of Parliament here, and one of the pieces of legislation we did recently was about restoration and renewal Parliament, and we call it R&R. So I'm going off to have some other sorts of R&R.
That's very good.
Yes, so no immediate plans, but I think just take a breath, think about what I want to do next, and then see what happens.
Well, thank you so much for 32 years of work. I'm sure we'll see you again doing all sorts of useful things in the public service, but that's been really great talking to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.